you're obviously here because you are already leaders, either in your company, in the community, in your household, whether you're an employee or an entrepreneur, you're already a leader. So today what I want to do is I want to talk about several concepts related to leadership that'll hopefully tie in everything that you have done and give it some practical meaning and help you understand who you are and what you're going to be. So let's identify the topics that we're going to be discussing today. First, I want to talk about what is a leader, because everybody has a different interpretation of what a leader is. Who becomes a leader? We all know that some people are better leaders than others. Is that a fair statement? Did you discover that about yourselves in the last, how long has it been?
7 months.
7 months. So you've probably discovered who is a better leader and what your tendency for leadership is going to be. We're going to talk about why people become leaders, and then ultimately what it takes to become a leader. Theoretically, everybody should be able to become a leader, but obviously some are better than others, and we're going to talk about what it takes to become a leader. So I need some participation here. Let's talk about what a leader is. I will submit to you that a leader is anyone that others are willing to follow, for better or for worse. So give me some examples. Who's got an example? What's a leader? A good listener? A mentor? Absolutely. Who else? Person with a vision?
Politician.
A politician? Absolutely.
Somebody who already proved himself.
Somebody who's already proven himself.
An athlete.
An athlete? Absolutely.
Business owners.
A business owner? Absolutely.
CEO.
Managers?
Teachers.
Teachers. Now we're getting on the...
Entrepreneurs.
And entrepreneurs. So let's take a look at the list that we've presented. Parents? How many agree? Yeah. How many of you are parents? All of you. Okay. Are parents leaders?
Yes.
We certainly think they should be, right? Teachers and principals, you pointed that out. Coaches and instructors. At the end of the day, we're putting our children in their hands, hoping that they will mentor them, which is what you said. Heads of government and politicians. I think somebody said that. Celebrity personalities. Interesting that nobody brought that one up. And yet you know a whole slew of them. Sports figures, that was mentioned. Company executives, directors, and managers. That's all of you. Agreed? Military commanders and religious or cult leaders, right? We go to church, there's a leader. We go to synagogue, there's a leader. So the question really becomes, why do these people emerge as leaders? What is it that prompts them to become leaders? Let's talk about that for a sec.
Out of necessity sometimes.
Absolutely. That is actually the crux of the matter. In most cases, leaders become leaders, or people become leaders out of necessity. People don't wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to be a leader. I mean, I remember when my little girl woke up, I think she was 4, she woke up one day and said, I'm the boss today. But at the end of the day, people become leaders by necessity. Somebody just became Pope, right? Why? By necessity, right? Somebody gave up that position. By necessity rather than by desire. That was very well done. So let's talk about some of the most influential leaders of all time. I said to you earlier, people become leaders for better or for worse. Not all leaders are good leaders, and not all leaders have led in a positive direction. Do we agree? But yet they've been very effective leaders. So let's take a look at the picture on the screen here. Does anybody not recognize somebody on the screen? We all know who they are? Okay, so, we've got, let's say top left. Who's that? Nelson Mandela. Talk about a tough life. Talk about leadership by necessity. Has he done good? He's done exceptionally well. And he certainly contributed to mankind in general. But he didn't wake up one day and say, I want to be a leader. It just kind of happened by necessity. Bottom right, who's that?
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates. Has he contributed to society?
A little bit.
In the billions of dollars, right? Personal wealth donated to society. and he's encouraging others to do it. So forget about Windows, forget about Microsoft for a sec. Here's a world-class billionaire who is contributing and encouraging others to contribute on a large scale to improving society. Now let's talk about the guy in the bottom left. Who's that? Bin Laden. Now, certainly not a leader who has led, certainly not from our perspective, that has contributed to mankind, right? However, has he been an effective leader? Yeah. Unbelievable, this guy. Out of a cave, he can lead people all around the world. We can barely do it out of our office when we're paying them to follow us. Right? This guy says, I am not going to pay you. You will give up your life, and they do. Right? Talk about effective leadership. You almost have to ask yourself, what does that guy have that these guys want to do that for him? What about the guy right beside him with the little mustache? Hitler. You know, certainly didn't do much for mankind, but was he an effective leader? Unbelievable what this guy can accomplish. Again, if you really think about history, why did it evolve? By necessity. Because I will submit to you that in the absence of leadership, people will follow almost anybody that steps up to lead. I want you to just think about that for a second. If there is no leadership in a group of people, if I said to you, this is your task, and there is no assigned leader, sooner or later, a leader will emerge. And you will follow that leader. And I bet you in the last 7 months while you're going through your program, you have noticed that. Some people just naturally step up. So how do you measure that quality, that leadership quality? It's not something that you can measure quantitatively. Agreed? Yeah. And in fact, if I said to you, let's measure it qualitatively, each one of you, and you kind of started that way when I first asked the question, each one of you will give me a different element by which to measure leadership. Right? So it's a qualitative thing. So it's very, very difficult to measure, and yet we are able to identify who leaders are. And I'm going to show you that. We agree that there are different leadership styles. You guys all work for different people, or you employ different people, or you have colleagues that you work with, and you will recognize that there are different leadership styles. Some of you have bosses you like, and some of you have bosses you don't like so much, right? Because of their different leadership styles. So leadership styles evolve and depend upon what? The people, the actual people that we're talking about, their unique personalities, the circumstances in that particular situation, the environment in which you are operating, the available resources that you are able to utilize, and ultimately, what the strategic objective is. So if I told you, same room, you have this objective or that objective, I guarantee you, you all react differently. Does that make sense? So let's talk about the different leadership styles. And as we go through these, I want you to think about people you know and actually think about yourself, because you are leaders and you're hoping to go back to your work environment or your business or your community and be a leader. And I want you to think about the type of leader that you are going to be and how you're going to conduct yourself as that leader. And so as we talk about these leadership styles, by the way, there is no perfect leadership style. And I will submit to you that most people are a composite of the different leadership styles depending on the situation, the circumstances, the resources, and the people. But I want you to think about who these people are and how you're going to react in different situations. So the orchestrator. So as you imagine, the orchestrator is the type of leader who will say, okay, so we have these resources, we have that objective, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this, right? And he will orchestrate everything at his disposal. This is not the guy that rolls up his sleeves and jumps right in, right? This is the orchestrator who puts everything, very effective leadership style, by the way. Who do you think works like this? Just think of somebody.
My husband.
Your husband. How about a conductor in an orchestra, right? He's got a variety of resources at his disposal, but he does not pick up a musical instrument, but they are very effective at what they do. Now transplant that euphemism into real-life scenario, and you can immediately picture people that are able to do that. And by the way, if your husband is that kind of leader, he's probably a very effective leader. Some of the people that he works with may not appreciate that, but that's not here or there, right? What about the delegator? We've seen this too, right? That's different than the orchestrator. That's just the guy that says, this is what we got to do. Each one of you have your tasks. Go do it. Let's reconvene and see what you've accomplished. Right? We've seen that. And there is a distinction between the orchestrator and the delegator. How many of you want to work for a delegator? Not many hands are going up, right? But you've all done it, right? What about worship me leadership? It's amazing how I just put up an image and you immediately relate to it, right? So in worship me leadership, and you've seen scenarios like this where there's a leader who wants to be loved, revered, and kind of puts himself on a pedestal above everybody else at, his disposal. Have we seen this? Okay. What about the carried leader? This is the leader who basically gets everybody else to do things so that they look good and will ultimately take all the credit. Very rare, right? Very rare. I mean, we've seen this often. How many of you want to work for one of those? How many of you have worked for somebody like that? There you go. In fact, I will submit to you that some of you are entrepreneurs because you've worked for somebody like this and said, you know what? If I'm going to do all this, I might as well be the carried leader. I am the king leadership. Very similar to the guy that wants to be revered. The difference is, in the I am the king leadership, all the pawns can be sacrificed. How many of you have been in that situation? Right? Now you're thinking about that. There you go. She immediately there's Donald Trump. That's her impression of Donald Trump as a leader, which is, I'm the king, you guys are all sacrificial pawns. You're hired, you're fired very easily, right? Turnabout leadership. So in turnabout leadership, this is typically a scenario in which somebody has methodically paid their dues and climbed the corporate ladder to accomplish something or to achieve a certain status. Now they're the leader, and they want you to do the same thing. And it's entirely possible that there may be some shortcuts that you could take, but not this guy. He wants you to pay the dues just like they did. In fact, where does this happen? In your environment. No. At the police academy, where, right? In the police, I'm sorry, your department, right. Right? You don't get to be the chief unless you have gone through all of the other stages that you need to go through. Where else? In the military. You don't just jump from, private to colonel. You do what we all did all along, right? There's a lot to be said for this, actually. It's a long haul, but, when push comes to shove, there's the leader at the top of that mountain has a lot of experience, demonstrated and proven. Somebody actually said proven, right?
That's kind of what we do with the helm of the board of directors of the chamber.
Right. Typically where you have a succession plan, that's this kind of plan. Collateral damage leadership. So in collateral damage leadership, the leader is the proverbial bull in the china shop. I have an objective, I am going to accomplish this objective, and I'm going to do it at all cost. And it doesn't matter what gets in our way, what we break, as long as we achieve the objective. And so sometimes it's you, the people in the team, and sometimes it's other elements that become collateral damage, right? It's one of those things where we accomplish one task, but we fixed 5 others to get there. He doesn't care. Politicians are very, very common in this scenario. Good point. The tyrant leader. So in the tyrant leadership style, the tyrant basically controls and suppresses and oppresses the people beneath him, right? Where do we see this? I'm sorry? Not so much, because in the military, they're expected to back you up. in this type of scenario, they won't. But think about, well, let's think about Cuba. Cuba, Venezuela, in a communist regime, this is what it's like. Now, how long does that last? How long will... Until what?
Until people rebel.
Until people rebel. Until people have said, that's it, I've had enough. Right? And so now you're seeing a little bit of, you've seen that in Egypt. You've seen that in Syria. So what happens typically is you get a civil war and the tide is turned. Right? It's a balance of power and control. Are there sacrifices made? Absolutely. Leadership by differentiation. So in this scenario, the leader is doing something that is completely different from the others, right? So as a result, people say, you know, I think he's got a novel idea there. Let's follow him, her, them, whatever the case may be. Leadership by differentiation is where you want to somehow stand out. Here's a little bit of a different take on it. I'll call this contrarian leadership. Now, contrarian leadership is where you're going to do something that is completely opposite to what the trend is. Now, you would typically do this in a scenario where you want what? Change, an alternate outcome. So if I want an alternate outcome, if the political leadership has been, I don't know, I'm just using an example now, political leadership has been liberal for the longest time, and I suddenly want change, and I see a conservative who represents that change, I'm following them. Sometimes it's not about the belief system, sometimes it's what you want to see. It's the desire for an alternate outcome. Then there's the optimist leader. Now remember what we said, leadership comes about by necessity rather than by desire. So you have the optimist leader who just doesn't see doom and gloom. They, right, but it's a little bit you too. Right? Am I right? Like, right, it's the person who always sees the upside in a scenario. It's the person who can take a negative scenario and make it look good. It's the person who just doesn't get down on themselves or on the situation. And these are rare. These leaders are rare. Because the general trend is, you know, misery loves company, right? Brazen leadership. Now, when we talk about leadership by necessity rather than desire, do you think that this guy woke up one day and said, I'm going to go stand in front of an army of tanks? Or did the circumstance dictate that I want, what did you say he wants? Change. He'd had enough. So he goes about committing change, right? But how does he do that? He takes on a very brazen role, almost at the peril of his own life, right? Same thing with that little duck. I mean, they're all standing there. They all swim, right? All these ducks swim. They're all diving into water, so what's the big deal? Oh, I see, it's like 30 feet down to that water. Somebody's got to take the first plunge. These ducks, you know, didn't say, you go first. Somebody finally said, all right, I'll do this. How many of you have seen this done? We see this done in the real world every once in a while. And typically, hey, listen, we mentioned Mandela. Was that guy brazen? Right? Did that take guts? Rosa Parks, did that take guts?
Martyrdom.
I'm sorry? Gandhi, absolutely. Martin Luther King, absolutely. You know, how many politicians do we know have given up their lives? Kennedy, Lincoln, these are all brazen leaders. They took personal risk to effectuate change. Team leadership. This is the, you know, the thing everybody talks about. This is the, you know, the thing that we all say should be the desirable outcome, right? So in team leadership, what happens? We try and all buy into the same cause. We all drink from the same Kool-Aid. But it takes a very effective leader to lead this way. It's good that you can identify people that way. It's tough to do this. It's tough to accomplish this. It's tough to get everybody on the same page and equally share in the duties, the responsibilities, right? And the outcome, right? So typically in team leadership, who gets the credit? Everybody, right? It's a very unique leadership style, very tough to accomplish. Leadership by conduct or example. So, you know, this is a scenario in which we follow people who actually walk their talk, right? Where have we seen this? Never more effectively than on 9/11, right? The leaders run into a burning building that's on fire and exploding, and a whole bunch of people follow them, right? Because it was the right thing to do. So, tough to do, but it's not always at life's peril, right? It's one of those do as I do, not just as I say. So in the workplace too, they say, you know, I lead by example. If my work ethic is diligence and I stay long hours and I work hard and I produce a good product, hopefully those people on my team or those who see what I'm doing will do the same thing. You know, we had scenarios recently where the banks, the big banks, had an issue with their mortgage and loan portfolios. Why? Because they didn't produce a good work product. They weren't diligent. Somebody was not walking the talk. Right? So you think about what you want to do when you go back into your work environments in terms of producing, you know, your product, and what kind of example you are setting for your team and what example you're showing your boss or your supervisor or the executive of that company. Step up leadership. Again, we come back to the issue of necessity rather than desire. How many times have we sat in a room and say, okay, this has to get done. Who's going to take care of this? And no hands go up. And so if that happens long enough, inevitably somebody will sooner say, fine, I'll do it. There we go. Step up leadership. That's the guy who said, fine, I'll take the bull by the horns and I'll deal with it. So sometimes you become a leader because you need to be, not because you desired to be. So having reviewed all of those, let's talk about what are critical leadership qualities. Integrity. How many agree with me? It's first and foremost, right? Integrity. You stay true to the core values. If you're the leader and you keep flip-flopping on what the core values are, you're going to lose your followers. Got to be trustworthy so that you can be relied upon to act predictably. One thing a leader has to be is consistent in what they do. Dedication. Owns the vision and strives towards it consistently, even in the face of adversity and objection. It's never easy, right? It's never easy, but you own that vision, you own that objective. You guys all had to go out and raise money for a good cause, right? Actually, 2. That wasn't easy. You could have given up, but yet you ended up raising more money than anybody that came before you. So that's because you guys never let go of the dedication that it took to get there. Magnanimity. So this is where the leader gives credit to others who deserve it based on their contribution or where it's due. Not very often, right? We know that. Open-minded. Willing to listen and explore new ideas. You know, there's the leader who says, this is what we're going to do. And then there's the leader who says, okay, this is what needs to be done. How do you think we should go about it? Again, when you guys go back to your respective workplaces, just think about how you go about doing what you're doing. Creativity. Able to think differently and innovatively. Because if we're all thinking the same way, that leader's not much of a leader. Fairness. Dealing justly and equitably with others. There's nothing worse than a leader or a boss who favors somebody over others, right? And it's inevitable. And hopefully if they do, it's because that person is more diligent, produces a better work product, is a better follower, better supporter of the cause. But in the ideal scenario, they're demonstrating equality and fairness to the members of their team. Assertiveness. Convincingly leads and clarifies with confidence. Listen, if I'm not convincing and if I'm not confident, are you going to follow me? Not likely, right? Right? So as soon as I no longer show assertiveness, you're going to go, well, I don't really know. He's not a very good leader, right? So assertiveness is imperative. Communicative. Able to articulate the vision and the objectives. How important is that? Without that, you really have very little, right? right? The team has to understand what the objectives are so that they can follow them. And lastly, personable, having a magnetic persona that attracts others. Because we don't all want to follow all the same people, right? Some people are just not worthy of being followed. And they have to have the kind of personality. It's funny how you guys are all nodding. It's funny that but you got to have the personality that causes other people to want to follow you and want to work with you. So here's a picture of the leadership roadmap. And basically what it's intended to do is convey to you that leadership is not a smooth road. It is not clearly paved. It is not always straight. It is fraught with bumps, obstacles, detours. But the leader somehow has to get through that. Because when you hit those obstacles, who does everybody look at? The leader. How many times have you gotten a call from your office, or has your team member come to you and said, okay, we got this problem? Okay? I once worked for somebody who said, we never have problems, we only have challenges. It was a brilliant, brilliant statement, because as soon as you eliminate the notion of not having problems, then you just got to figure out how to deal with that challenge. And we all live for challenges, right? So navigating the leadership roadmap takes a certain skill set and a certain mindset. And we will follow the person who consistently demonstrates an ability to get through that. And that requires them to know which way to turn. Often a leader will come to one of these, T junctions and say, okay, well, I have a couple of choices. I can go left or right. Which one do I do? And I will submit to you that even the leaders don't always know which way to go. But I will tell you that a good leader will always make a choice, right or wrong. Because not making a choice is also making a choice. Right? So they'll make a choice. Their worst case scenario is they deviated one way because they made a choice. They realize that that's not going to work out, and they correct and come back on course. But if I don't make a choice, the circumstances are going to continue as they are, right? Status quo is also a choice. So the critical leadership debate is, are leaders born or made? What do you think? Both, right? How do you really make a leader? I mean, we all have babies. We do our best to nurture our children. And the kids that show tremendous promise don't necessarily become leaders. And the people that never showed any promise suddenly become leaders. How's that possible? Because it happens by necessity rather than by desire. Is the leadership quality innate or learned? In other words, are you born with it? How many times have we said this statement? They are a born leader. Right? We say this all the time. But the reality is, I have a friend who said, my company is a big success. So it's a success that took 15 years, right? He's a born leader because he just got elected. But he wasn't born 5 minutes ago. It was a sequence of circumstances that evolved and caused him to change to become the leader that he is today. Right? Can you learn to be a leader? Like, do we give courses in this stuff at school? Like, if I could tell people how to be a leader, but if they don't have the personality, are they going to be leaders? Not everybody. Frankly, otherwise, we would all be leaders, right? Everybody would turn out to be a leader. Does skill or circumstance determine leadership? And really, this is the crux of the matter as far as I'm concerned. It takes a certain skill to be a leader. It takes a certain personality to be a leader. But I really believe that leaders become leaders based on circumstance. You don't know in advance who's going to be a really good leader. And you've learned that in your own group. You've seen what happens when people need to step up. The one thing that we do know is that leadership is universal. It applies within the human race. It applies to animals. We see this all the time. The same thing applies universally. We just don't recognize it. So what are the leadership requirements? I believe that leadership takes absolutely no talent. What it does take is commitment. How many people agree? I mean, we've seen people with the most unlikely skill set become leaders, right? So if leadership doesn't require talent, you are all qualified, right? You just have to recognize what it takes to be a leader, the circumstances under which leadership happens, and then you have to decide what kind of leader you want to be. And we just went through all of that, right? So when you go back to your respective workplaces, owner-operated businesses, go back to your home and be your head of household, or go back to your community and volunteer and help out, just keep all those elements in mind to decide, you know, am I potentially a leader? And if so, what kind of leader do I want to be, and how am I going to go about it? That's my presentation. Thank you.
I just want to I can't think of a better way to wrap up this whole year than the presentation you just did. So thank you. It was just awesome.
Thanks.
So thank you. Thank you so much.